Ideas, Birkbeck's free public lecture series where academics bring their research out to local communities around London, sharing the exciting and innovative work that happens at Birkbeck and opening up the world of research and university. The series is organised by Birkbeck's Access and Engagement team, who support underrepresented groups of people to apply and succeed here at Birkbeck, University of London. This podcast will introduce you to the upcoming talks in the Big Ideas series. Our researchers will give you a preview of what's in store and hopefully entice you along to the event. If you like what you hear today and want to come along, you can find the details in the web link in the description of the podcast. We'd love to see you there. Hello, I'm Anna Heatherton, Access Officer for Adult and Community here at Birkbeck. Today I am joined by Dr Eleni Liarou, a lecturer and researcher here at Birkbeck. She will be introducing her research ahead of our Big Ideas talk in December. Her research is a BBC Radio archive project, and the talk in December is titled Whose Voice, Whose Story? BBC Radio News and the Language of Race. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. So we're really looking forward to this talk in Newham, and we just wanted to understand a little bit more about the research that you're doing. So if I may ask, where did this work start? What was the inspiration? How did it come about?
Yes, hello. Great to be here, first of all, and lovely to be part of this Big Ideas series. This is part of a project we are doing at Birkbeck. It's funded by the British Academy, and it's a knowledge exchange project. And it's about studying the language of race in radio news, BBC radio news, in the post-war period after the Second World War, from 1945 to the mid-90s. And this is a work in progress, obviously, and we have a research assistant with us, Sylvie Carlos. I'm sure she won't mind me, talking about her, because we're very glad to have Sylvie. She's also a radio producer, and what we're doing is we want to engage as many people as possible to kind of participate and contribute to this project, which has two parts, and I can talk about them.
Yeah, do you want to go into
Yes, sure. So the first part is we'll be looking at a digital collection of news scripts, what basically the radio newsreaders said, read out on home service, what later became Radio 4, as I say, during that period of the post-war period. So we're looking at those, the news bulletins, and we are particularly focusing on questions around the experience of the Afro-Caribbean community in the UK. And so we are asking questions around, for example, the issue of how are certain events reported, how certain individuals are talked about, what is covered, what is not covered in the news. We're looking at sort of key public debates around racism, institutional racism, anti-racism, anti-discrimination, which are, I think, very topical. And the second part, so we're looking at, so that's the first part, and that is the analysis of those scripts, and we are going to present the work in online. There will be a website, a digital resource where people can go and sort of have a look at the research findings. Amazing. The second part will be more public focused, and so we are going to do a series of podcasts, and we're going to invite individuals from across the country, hopefully from these communities of Afro-Caribbean heritage, to speak back effectively to the BBC's reporting and tell us their own experiences, tell us how they feel about that reporting, what they know, what they remember. We would like to invite different generations to speak to each other, and so this is hopefully going to be an intergenerational dialogue about, for example, how people remember the experiences they kind of that are reported in these news scripts. And and then again, that will be publicly accessible, so for people to use and hopefully be a resource for everyone. It would be in public libraries and for everyone to use. We're working with the BBC Archive, I should say. They are our key partners in this, and they have made accessible this resource. It's a digital collection of BBC news scripts, which is currently not publicly available, but it will be publicly available, so everyone at some point will be able to access those hundreds of thousands of stories read out on Home Service and Radio 4, which is essentially the whole of the history of Britain, or some of it.
Wow. And can I ask, why was the part 2, the speaking back element, important to this project?
I'm glad you're asking this, because I think this is where our heart is, really. It's about telling a different story of the BBC, telling a different history of the BBC, which is not written by an academic only, by a researcher, by the kind of, if you like, the elite of kind of an elite club. And it's giving back to the people who should be part of the story, giving back to them something to kind of to give them room and the chance, the opportunity to contribute. So the speaking back in more specific terms, if you like, comes from a very kind of old debate in studies around the empire and the legacy of empires and imperialism. Those debates around decolonization, around the kind of the idea of power and knowledge. And so starting point is really something that is kind of been around now for quite a few years, or even decades actually, but it's kind of definitely got a more momentum with Black Lives Matter. And this is the debate around decolonizing the academia, decolonizing the curriculum, decolonizing museums, archives, and so on. The BBC, alongside us, probably no other organisations and institutions like the British Library, the British Museum, are really looking at their collections. British Film Institute as well. They're really looking at their collections quite closely and thinking about how to address the widest possible public, how to tell inclusive stories as well. So the speaking back is part of that kind of ethos.
And how will you reach people? How will people be able to take part, or are we not at that stage yet?
We're not at that stage yet,
yes.
But we are. I mean, what we are doing with this talk in Newham is definitely part of it. We are kind of making people aware of the project, and they can sign up, and we can tell them what it is about, and they can sign up, and we can contact them later on and tell them where we are, and if they are interested, they'd be, you know, we'd be happy to collaborate with them. So we'll be going out into communities. We are already working with a number of think tanks, organisations, archives and libraries, including the Black Cultural Archives, the Institute of Race Relations, Migrant Rights Network. We are consulting all these organisations and, you know, looking to kind of understand how we can complement also the work they're doing, and other individuals and researchers across the country. We're also working with the Black Miners Museum in Nottingham, for example, and there's a lot of work that's happening in Nottingham actually, at the university there in that area. So yes, it's a very collaborative project.
Amazing. So then on that, what has the process been so far, and what has the research looked like?
Yeah, so it's been really fascinating. We are at the moment looking at the news reports, and we have a set of questions, we have a set of terms we are searching. For example, when did the term racism first appear in news, radio news?
Wow.
I'm not going to tell you the answer now.
Okay, excellent.
So you've got to come back to the project and find out.
Amazing.
But what we're doing is to kind of ask those kinds of questions, you know, when, how certain events like the Nottingham riots of the late 50s, how are they reported? What are the gaps in that reporting? There are certain events that you might think, yeah, that's what's reported, maybe they weren't, why? So there are gaps and absences and silences that we're also addressing. So we are looking at the database. There's some things we kind of started to learn. It's not a kind of black and white picture. It is quite complex sometimes, and you might think, yeah, of course, the BBC, it is an establishment. It is an organisation that you might think, of course, promotes the establishment view, but it's also an organisation that has changed over the years, and we are looking at this period from the late 40s to the mid 90s, which is a kind of a period of great change for BBC and BBC Radio as well. So there are differences and nuances.
And probably quite unrecognisable to today's BBC and how things are reported.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, looking at the old news scripts, the 40s and 50s scripts. I mean, we're not looking at audio, so this is a digital collection of news scripts, so it's all scripts, but we are going to go back to the archive and see what survives in terms of audio, because it'd be interesting to hear some of those voices. But definitely, even from looking at the scripts themselves, without having the voice of the newsreader, you can understand the tone, you can see the tone and what the agenda was. Yes, it changed a lot, yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. And then can I ask, so far, has there been anything that's really surprised you, anything that's really interested you, or is that again something we need to come back to learn?
I think a bit of both. There are things that have surprised us in terms of the absences of things not being reported at all. At the same time, there are things there in terms of the reporting and the language used to report on issues of ethnic diversity and race, and particularly the Afro-Caribbean experience, that are not surprising. And depressingly enough, they form part of a quite long history of racialized language. But I think it's a bit of both so far.
Obviously, this work is incredibly important. But why was it important to you? What attracted you to the project? And why, from your point of view, is it important work?
I think, let me start with a little story, actually, because it is interesting how this started. This started in the middle of the pandemic. And what happened was I invited somebody from the BBC archive to give a talk to our students. I was part of a seminar on TV. And it was all online at that point, and that was a small group of students, and we were all there listening to Jake, the person from the BBC, who gave a really interesting talk. And one of the things he talked about was this project, this digitization of this collection of news scripts. And that immediately caught my attention. That sounded really quite important as a resource. But I want to say this. I think one of the motivating factors behind me kind of really pursuing this and kind of thinking about a project to use this resource, was a student. The motivation, the inspiration, if you like, behind this was a student. That's the thing about backpack students. They are students that can inspire us. They can really kind of change sometimes the way we think about the research we do. And it wasn't anything transformational, but it was a little question the student asked Jake, and I thought, that's really interesting. And I just couldn't stop thinking about it. After the seminar, I went back to the student, I went back to Jake, I kept talking with them, but I kept talking also with the BBC about accessing the resource, and eventually I put an application together, and here we are. So I'm telling the story because, as I say, we learn from our students constantly all the time, and I'm hoping this particular student will be very much part of this project. Secondly, I think it's kind of this project fits into kind of my research I've been doing for the last 20 years, which is about the contribution of migrants, of emigres, of refugees to British culture, and trying to understand how issues around ethnicity and cultural diversity are represented in the media, on and off the screen, and why this is important. And I think hopefully we all understand this is important because it gives us a more kind of enriched kind of idea of the world we live in, and the society we kind of have.
Do you know what the question was that the student asked?
I think it was a very kind of self-motivated question about how does the archive represent the Black experience, the Black British experience. Sure. Which is something I've been preoccupied with, but it was a kind of the tone and the urgency that this student asked the question with, that he really wanted to know and understand. And I thought, exactly. I mean, here we are. A lot of I think us would like to know that.
And then, with regards to our evening in Newham, the Big Ideas talk, what would you like people to take away from that evening?
That's a good question. I think the key thing I would like to people to sort of take from this talk and project is how they can themselves be part of it, if they are interested, if they think they can see themselves as part of it. In other words, as I said earlier, it's about writing a different history of the BBC. It's a public history of the BBC, a people's history of the BBC. And the other thing is that I want to, kind of point is that I would like people to sort of be empowered by this, kind of to know that it doesn't matter whether their story is sort of something they think might be mundane or not as important or not as specific enough, or they don't have the full memory. I think all these stories are important to collect, and so I think this idea that research is only done by academia is something that's been questioned for some time now, but I think this project wants to take this a bit further and make public part of the writing of the history of the BBC.
And hopefully our Big Ideas evening will do that. Thank you so much. We're really looking forward to it, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.